Hello, this is Steve Kimes, pastor of Onawim Christian Community and founder of Village of Hope.
And my name is Ebony and I'm a staff pastor at a church in Columbia Heights, as well as the founder of the Kinky Curly Theological Collective.
And we welcome you to Black Gal, White Guy, in which Ebony and Steve have a discussion about social justice and theology. We explore the edges of conventional theology, hoping we don't fall in. Today, we'll be talking about the projects that have been occupying us for the last few weeks. But first, let's go ahead and talk about our recommendations. So, Ebony, what have you got?
So many. So many different recommendations. First of all, in case there's some slight chance that someone who's listening to us has not gone to the theater since Jesus came, go see Black. Just in case, please go see Black Panther. Please.
It's so awesome. Oh my goodness, I was so excited about it. That was great.
It was me and my husband. Me and my husband went to go see it the day after Valentine's Day, and it was just so amazing, and it blessed our souls so much, and just felt really encouraged and affirmed as African and African American people and as a couple. So I really encourage people to go see that. Another resource I have that's not as well known. I've been reading this book by Parker Palmer called A Hidden Wholeness. And it's just a really, really beautiful book around spirituality and wholeness and healing and community. And I really like Parker Palmer's voice and tone overall. This is the second book I've read by him. And I think he's just really great spiritually. He's really spiritually attuned, very sensitive, caring, nurturing spirit. And that really comes across in the book that I'm reading right now. So I would encourage, if you have not read anything by him, to read Hidden Wholeness. It's really, really beautiful, and it will definitely also bless you. Not as much as Black Panther would, but it's up there. So those are my two recommendations.
I'm so glad you mentioned Black Panther. I forgot about mentioning that. And I have a whole list of possible recommendations that wasn't even on my list, and yet I have to recommend that. And it's so great. I think I wasn't going to recommend it because I'm assuming everybody's seen it. It hasn't even been out a weekend. I'm assuming everybody's seen it, but go see it. It's great. Right. But that's not my recommendation, or it's my secondary recommendation. And what I was going to recommend is a different movie, which is a documentary called I Am Not Your Negro, which focuses on Alex Baldwin and his words and experiences of the civil rights movement. And it's really deep. And I just love the articulation, the very scholarly, wonderful articulation of deep anger.
So I want to correct you really quick. So maybe you can start over. Because Alex Baldwin is the actor. James Baldwin is the person from... I wanted to throw you a lifeline before you got too far.
Thank you. I watched too many movies. Okay. James Baldwin. Oh, yeah. Okay. Can we start over? No, we won't start over. Okay. We're just going to keep going. I made my mistake. I own up to it. Yes, James Baldwin. Thank you. Okay. Anyway, and so that movie is great. But you know what? I'm not even recommending that movie. That's not the one I want to recommend. Instead, I want to recommend a movie from the late 60s, 1965, mid-60s. It's called A Time for Burning. A Time for Burning. And it covers the same period of time that I Am Not Your Negro covers. But what it does is it specifically targets one congregation's experience, one white liberal congregation who is just very open to the civil rights movement and very open to what it is that to new expressions and all that, and yet they had deep conflict when some of the congregation wanted to invite African Americans into their church, because that was where the rubber met the road. And I challenge churches to see this film, especially white churches. Look at this film, and this is the same thing that's being played out in churches all over the United States about whether they're going to allow LGBTQ people to go into to come into membership, or the other types of things. And now we may look at that and say, oh my goodness, why aren't these people letting these African Americans come in? Well, you know what? The issue is still there, because basically the issue is bigotry. And that has not changed. That has not changed. Anyway, so that's called A Time for Burning. Highly recommended. It is a really insightful, great documentary. Okay, so what we're going to do here, we're gonna talk about what Ebony's been up to. But before we do, I would like to just give an update on the last podcast we did. The last podcast we did was actually a number of weeks ago. And a lot has happened since then. Now, we talked about villages at that point. And when I was talking about villages on that podcast, we had not yet established our village. And we've done that now. We established our village for houseless folks to come in, and we were able to establish our village for 5 days before the city came in, pushed everybody out, and took all of our possessions. That happened in 5 days. And I just want to say that when we set up our village for houseless folk, we were taking people from the street in the same local area and just setting them up on platforms and giving them a stable place to be. They were already on the property that we were at, already living in the parks that we had set up the village. And when we set up the village, we were protecting the environment in a way that the city was not. And yet when the city shut us down, they said that we were harming the environment, but we were the ones who cleaned up 25 bags of trash before we ever set up. And then the whole purpose of what we were doing was to provide stability from sweeps, so that way people could get off the streets, because people were being forced to move every other week in order. And how are they supposed to access social services? How are they supposed to live? How are they supposed to do that if they keep having to move? But instead, the city said, nope. We don't want you to be there. We do not want you to publicly say that you are giving a good place for houseless people to live. And so they sent 40 city workers, both rangers and police officers, to force our seed group of 10 people off of the land. And they trespassed us all, so that way if we came back, that we would be arrested. At this point, what we've been doing is we've been working on finding land and pursuing the city, so that way we can reestablish our village. And that's going to happen. We've been making progress on that, but we're still kind of in limbo right now. We are still, so to speak, a houseless, homeless village. Anyway, I just wanted to give an update. This is what happened the last few weeks and what I've been working on. But I want to spend most of the time talking about what Ebony's been working on. Our main subject today is on the Kinky Curly Theological Collective. And I have to say, Ebony, I'm tempted to call it the KCTC, or is that going too far?
I don't think that's going too far, no.
Okay. So, because I feel like doing that, because I like the alliteration in there, the Kinky Curly Theological Collective, but that's a mouthful.
Yeah.
Anyway, so it is a collective of Black women writing about theology, talking with each other, building community, giving each other space to explore God and Jesus and the Bible without others who have dominated the subject for centuries, like, let's say, men or old white guys. And the founder, or one of the founders of the KCTC, is our very own Ebony Adedayo. And so I really want to give you a chance to talk. So what gave you the idea for the collective? What spurred this on?
Yeah, so there are a couple of things that really led to the start of the Kinky Curly Theological Collective. You just got to say it really fast and then it rolls off and it's not as cumbersome.
I'll try and remember that.
Right. So I think one of the initial things is, you know, I have been looking to be in ministry for a while. I entered college in 2001 at a conservative Christian school, and then went to seminary in 2006 to further my studies in theology and ministry. For both times, because I knew I felt called since I was a wee little thing, maybe 13 years old, that God had my hand and had his hand on me to be in ministry. I felt that, I sensed that, had it confirmed in different ways, in different spaces that I've been a part of over the years. And yet one of the things that I kept running up against was this barrier as a result of being a Black woman. A lot of people don't want to talk about that, but my experience as a dark-skinned African-American woman cannot be minimized in terms of wanting to explore and be a part of ministry spaces, especially spaces that affirm who I am as a Black woman, who are concerned about justice and liberation. Those spaces are few and far between. I started the Kinky Curly Theological Collective really out of my own need to create a space where I fit. And it hasn't, the theology and ministry hasn't been the only space where I have not fit. There have been other spaces throughout my life where I have felt like the odd one out. And instead of trying to conform myself to fit into a space that was not designed for me, that excluded me, I wanted to be intentional about starting something that was designed around my own particularities, understanding that there were other Black women out there who were most likely in the same boat that I was in. And a couple other reasons really led me to start this work. I've had a vision and mission in my mind about starting something for a really long time. However, I felt like one of the other pieces is that I needed to do my own healing, because I kept finding myself tripping up over my own insecurities because of the limits that people have placed on me over the years. I've been in spaces where the setting was supposed to be liberal, was supposed to be progressive, whatever those words mean, and have been sat down, so to say, by white men who were in charge, who did not agree with my nuance or approach to scripture, who did not feel like my point of view was valid. And I got tired of hearing those messages, but I also deeply internalized those messages. So felt like I was constantly inadequate and I was constantly fighting and competing with other women so that I could shine. And I didn't want to compete. I don't want to compete. I don't want to feel like I have to constantly prove myself, because God has already proved me. So there's no need for any of that. I wanted a space where I could be myself, where I could lead in my full giftings, where other Black women could lead in our full giftings, and connect with one another. That was the other piece that was really important to me, is that there are so many Black women, not just people who are in theology and who are in ministry, but Black women, and y'all know this, are often regarded as just the mules of the world. Zora Neale Hurston makes this line in her book about just how Black women in our society are regarded. And so whether it's the church or home or work or community or some other thing demanding our time, we are often taxed and stretched so thin that we don't have time for ourselves and we don't have time for relationships. And so in creating this space, I didn't only want to think about how we curate, how we think about theology, how we practice spirituality. I wanted a place where we felt like we could heal, where we could address some of the reasons why we are being burnt out and stretched thin, where we could build those deep, meaningful sisterhood relationships with one another. So we felt supported by a community of people. So we knew and understood that in this work that we're doing, we're not doing it alone. The other reason, and I think this is maybe the final reason that I really have really wrestled with, but have understood the need to address this, is that for many people of color, and I can say for many African American people, there is a wrestling with and against Christianity. I don't know when it started. I'm sure it's been for a while. But I think in some of the sectors and the spaces where I have been in of late over the last year and a half, 2 years, I have heard and been in conversation and been in community with folks who have a hard time reconciling this Jesus of the Bible that we preach about with this Jesus who was used to justify slavery and genocide. And that's a legitimate question. That's a real question that we need to wrestle with as a church body. I'm not seeing other churches wrestle with that. And so one of the other pieces why I created this space is that, look, if we're going to talk about theology and we're going to talk about spirituality, we're not only going to talk about the things that are good and that are hopeful, we're going to talk about some of the stuff that's in our closet as Christians and this history that we have to reconcile with if we're going to move forward as a church movement. And I wanted that conversation being led by Black women, because I see this move around decolonial theology. It's still led by white men, which means that any framework that is proposed will still be centered on white men, no matter how progressive or decolonial it is. And I just want to really say that if we're talking about something that affects people of color and immigrants and queer and so many other marginalized identities, the people who are affected need to be leading the discussion. And if the qualification around leading the discussion is educations and degrees, we need to adjust our qualifications to make sure that those who are most deeply affected by the problems are the ones solutioning towards the problem. And I'm not seeing that. I'm not seeing in Minnesota where I live, I'm not seeing in this space around social justice theology and racial justice, a space where Black women are leading. I see antidotes that are leading across the national stage, who are great, who are wonderful examples of God's world and God's vision for the world. How do we scale that up? How do we make sure that there are more Black women's voices who are leading without needing to have those voices validated by white men?
That was a great answer. And in fact, actually, I noticed even in MennoNerds, the discussions that we have had on in groups or in blogs or whatever, I notice a lot of times as a conversation goes on, that women in general seem to be I find that women tend to withdraw from the conversation as it goes on, and I also note that that there are men who's just like, well, women, why aren't you speaking up? And I'm just looking and saying, well, it doesn't look like there's a context here in which women can be comfortable speaking up, and I wonder if that's. I wonder if that's kind of the approach that you're taking with KCTC, just trying to create a context in which people can feel free to say what it is that they need to say. Is that kind of where you're going?
I think it has a lot to do with that. I mean, just speaking to my own experience, the experience that I've had around censorship, if I can be quite frank, in spaces where I wanted to raise my voice and elevate my voice, and have had one case in point, and I'm not going to say his name, but a prominent national pastor called me out on Twitter in my at replies so that no one else could see the conversation, but tried to make a salient point that I was wrong and he was right. And essentially said I was talking about multicultural church growth in I can't remember the context because it was a couple years ago. And so all of the words and phrases that I used in the article that he was calling me out on, I don't remember. But essentially he said, "Thank you for your concern around multicultural churches," as if in my identity as a Black woman, I did not belong in that conversation. And so even his own orientation around who has the right to speak to this, it wasn't me. I don't know who he had in mind, but it sure wasn't me. And so in his comments, he really tied to silence that voice, that voice that was going to push out and challenge him on his thinking. And I don't even know why he responded in the first place, because I'd never even mentioned him. It was an article that I wrote that I posted on a blog platform of a friend of mine's. So in no way talking about his church or his ministry, but felt the need to get up in my mentions on Twitter. I'm like, don't you have better things to do than to call out this Black woman who barely knows you exist, but you're on this national platform? Like, I don't understand. And so I think, to your point, I think when we wrestle with so many different things all day, and so many, not microaggressions, but just blanket, flat out aggressions, that we pick and choose our battles. It's like, are we going to do battle here in this place to make ourself known and feel sucky and invalidated while doing it? Or are we going to go somewhere where we feel affirmed? And I can tell you, most of us, after working and dealing with kids and balancing checkbooks and going grocery shopping and cooking and leading ministries and doing all these different things, online spaces are the last place that we're going to think about in trying to work things out. We're going to spend time and community where that investment really counts.
That makes a lot of sense. And it really also gives an opportunity for you folks as Black women to actually own theology. You're not just a voice amidst many voices. No, it is you owning it. This is your Jesus. This is your Bible, and you are now able to present it without not just dissenting points of view, because of course you're going to have dissenting points of view because you're different people, but it's that constant, it's the voice of power. The voice of power quelches not just innovation, but a lot of times the voice of power quelches truth. And like you were saying about that one pastor talking about talking to you as if, well, thank you for your concern, as if you don't belong in the conversation. That just doesn't make any sense. I mean, if anybody belongs in the conversation, you belong more than he does.
Exactly. Right. It's so preposterous to me, but whatever. Luckily, Twitter has receipts, and so if I looked hard enough, I could find it. But
not that we're interested in calling anybody out.
No, it was 3-4 years ago. Yeah. But I mention it because it is indicative of some of the experiences that I have had. And I know I'm not the only one, that other Black women have and continue to have, that we have to constantly prove ourselves in order to be considered valuable, in order to be taken seriously. that we have to have these degrees. We need to have this national platform. We need to have all these things. I'm like, can't you just take my word for it because I said it? Because I'm speaking from my own experience. I'm not speaking from a textbook. I'm speaking literally from the life that I live every single day. Can't that be proof and valid enough? And yet the ironic thing is, no, it's not. And yet people will come and study our communities and write dissertations on our experience and become proficient in our experience. And yet we can't be taken seriously on our experience. Like, I don't get it. I don't get how a sociologist can come into a Black community. As much as I appreciate sociology, as much as I appreciate the science and what it has done to offer different perspectives to the world. But with my train of thought, I can't understand how a sociologist or anthropologist and other people who study our communities can come into our communities as an objective observer over a period of 6 months, a year, 18 months, and become experts on it when this is our day-to-day every single day. Why can't Black women be the experts on our experience? Why can't we be the experts on our viewpoints and have those viewpoints be taken just as seriously as our white male counterparts? It's not to say that white men's viewpoints are not valid, though there's some questioning around that. That's not what I'm here to argue. What I'm here to argue, to say, is that, look, we're all created in the image and likeness of God. The same spirit that lives and dwells and breathes in white men also live and dwell and breathe in Black women. And when we miss our voice in that conversation and in the narrative about how to do life and how to do church and how to do so many other things, we miss the voice and narrative of God. Point blank.
So I'm wondering about how somebody looking from outside, seeing the project and how exclusive it is, and how, okay, this is for the voices of women of color. I wonder if some people are saying, well, but that's not really the spirit of Jesus, because the spirit of Jesus is unity of all perspectives, and you're blocking off just one perspective. How can that be the spirit of Jesus when you are when you're only dealing with one aspect of the whole variety of Christian experience? And so how would you answer that person?
I would say that this is one medium, one way that African and African American women are going to come together and take care of our stuff, and be with one another and be in community. In my work in the nonprofit sector over the last few years, I have noticed that people are far more comfortable talking about inclusivity, diversity, multiculturalism. All those things are really, really good. Very few people are comfortable talking about Blackness. We want to put our issues in the mix, in the pot with all the other issues. And we won't talk about the particular way that Black women are marginalized. Our particularity, how we're socialized in this country, we won't talk about that, because when we talk about that, we're being racist. When we talk about that, we're being exclusive. No, that's not what it is. It means that we're actually taking care of what we need to take care of in order to heal and be present so that we can be a part and re-engage the world. So this isn't I hate to use this word because it's so ugly. This is not a separatist movement. This is a space where we're going to say, we're actually here. We're going to talk about our stuff. We're going to explore our theology. We're going to explore our particularity. And as you said before, there's so much diversity among us already. I don't know how we add another identity to that pot, because there's so many different viewpoints already as it is, because Black and African American women are not a monolith. In our meeting a couple of weeks ago, we were engaging African and African women of the diaspora. And so there were people in our meeting who were from Kenya and from Cameroon and from Nigeria and from here and from Midwest and from down south. Like, all of us think differently. I mean, we have things that are in common, the beautiful hair and the skin tone, but there are a lot of things that are different, a lot. And so I don't even know practically how we would add something else to that. But even in spite of that, like, women need to have a space where we can be ourselves, where we can say, you know, we're going to protect this space. It's sacred space. And if other people want a space, they should go create that and do that. And then I think what can happen is, as we create this space and as we are clear about what it is that we want to offer around theology, we can join hands with others. We can join hands with other women of color. We can join hands with other women. We can join hands with men and men of color as we get solid on what it is that we're creating. So it's not separating in order to remain that way, is separating in order so that we can be stronger to re-engage and partner in different ways, so that we can ensure that when we do partner, when we do link up with other people, that our issues remain our issues and that those continue to rise to the top without them getting buried away.
And I think it's important for us to remember that there are spaces for theological conversation. They're called seminaries.
Yeah.
And those were made specifically so that white men would be comfortable being able to talk theology with other white men. That's what that space was created for. And yes, there are people of color in those spaces, but it was not made for people of color. That isn't the place where necessarily folks of color are comfortable speaking and discussing the things of Jesus.
Mm-hmm. And that's a really valid point. And I think that's one of the other reasons that I was really led to create this space, is that understanding that seminaries, for better or for worse, they're declining, right? That the enrollment, at least the seminaries in Minnesota, I don't know about the rest of the world or the rest of the country, but in Minnesota, they're not doing so great. And I think a piece of it is because they are designed for white men, and people of color and women of color and people with any other different identity are not included. And so how do we equip the next generation of leaders who are going to lead and do God's work? Is it going to be in a traditional seminary that limits and cuts off our voices? No, because we're not going to go. I think our generation, across cultural identities, there's a consciousness that is among us that we're just way too smart for that. And so you look at someone who's graduating high school, who's 17, 18 years old, whether they be Black, Latino, or something else, maybe they'll go to a seminary, but many of them wanting to enter ministry may choose to go to a traditional college and hope it works out in between, because they know that those places are not designed for young Black and brown students. I'm still traumatized thinking about my college and seminary education, because it really, really wasn't. It was one of the most isolating times in my life. And I didn't find the camaraderie that I needed until I found a multicultural church off campus in my junior year. And so my junior and senior years in my undergrad, my lifeline was the multicultural church that I was a part of. As a result of that, I didn't feel the need to continue to find the meaning that I was once looking for on campus, because I knew it wasn't there. And I just wonder, if it had not been for that church, how I may have left that school, how differently my life would have turned out.
Yeah. Well, I want to talk a little bit about the space that you created and the technology that you're using. I know that you use blogs to write to one another, but I also hear you talk about conversations and meetings from different parts of the world. What kinds of we're getting into the nerd part of MennoNerd a little bit here. So what kinds of technology are you using in order to communicate to people, and how's that working for you, and why are you using those particular forms of communication or technology instead of other ones?
Yeah, the answer is really, really simple, and really just really super simple. We're meeting face to face. Like, and so,
I mean, are you using Skype or chat, or not chat, but
no? And so when I talked about the different people from around the world, it's because they live in Minnesota, and so these are.
I see. You mean literal face to face, no technology involved at all?
Yeah, just old-fashioned conversation. And I think that's the beauty. That's what I would like to see be something that makes this worthwhile, is that we are so caught up on technology and computers and our phones and Skype, and all these things are wonderful. And all these things keep us connected with people across the world. And I want to get there. I want to get to a place where this becomes something bigger that is national, international. And right now, I'm focused on where I'm planted, which is Minnesota, for better or for worse. There's a snowstorm tomorrow. I have to cancel all my little plans. And so a lot of times it's for worse in this season. But I believe that there's something that happens when we're face to face. I believe that there's a sacredness that that is present that can't be maintained over the computer, or it can't be maintained over the phone. I think we can manufacture some of that, but there's something about the human connection that needs to be preserved. And so I'm really intent on, as much as possible, let's actually gather together and let's touch each other and let's be in each other's presence, and let's hold space for each other, and let's cry on one another, and let's laugh and dance and have fun together, because I believe that that's where healing comes. That's where grounding comes. That doesn't come online. It doesn't. And if we're talking about actual relationships and connections, we can use the online mediums to help fill the gaps in between, but that can't be our only medium. That has to be something that supports the actual physical coming together. And there are reasons why our church models have worked for so long. As problematic as some of them are, the coming of together of people of like mind and like heart is important. It's important to the faith experience. Without that, we will isolate ourselves. We won't be our true, authentic selves, and we won't build community.
So really what you're doing there is not just having a collective, you are establishing a congregation. You are being church. You're creating, in a sense, your own denomination.
Nope. I'm not starting no church. I'm not starting a denomination. I'm starting a space. I'm cultivating a space for Black women who are theologians, who are spiritually minded, whether they are in full-time ministry or not, who want to have community with one another. And on Sunday, I hope they have a church or a place where they can worship, because I'm not starting unless God has some other plan. That's not what this is about. This is just about community and reflection and growing. I want this to be a space where we feel like we can be ourselves, our authentic selves. And I want it to be a space where we're actually curating as well. And so when I talk about doing theology, like, we should be writing theology. We don't need a PhD to do that. And I'm not minimizing the academic and intentionality and the academic rigor that goes with writing theology. But let's be serious. For many of our lives, especially when you're talking about the African American experience, our mothers and our grandmothers have been significant spiritual mentors in our lives. who have led us, who have prayed for us, who have kept us from going astray. That's huge. That's huge. We already have so much capital and resources right there. By talking about our own experiences and narratives, we're going to need to do more, but let's start with what we have. And so, no to the denomination, no to the congregation. I just want to make that crystal clear. So if anybody gets this spangled idea in their imagination, you will remember my words on this date, and you will understand that I said no to the congregation.
Oh, I'll remember. We'll see where this grows in about 10 years, and we'll see if those words don't come back to bite you.
And you never know what God will do, but that's not my intent right now. My intent right now is to really change the framework, to change the theological framework. And I would be playing small to say that I was going to start a church. There's so many churches that are doing amazing things, and yet the framework around theology is the same. And so imagine, if you will, you have Black women. So this is really what I'm looking for, what I'm aiming for. You have Black women across Minnesota, across the United States, across Africa, and wherever they may be in the diaspora, who are leading from this place. Imagine how that could really change the framework around theology. Having a deepened understanding of who we are and leading from the assets and the resources and perspectives and the pain. There's a lot of pain. We got to lead from that too. By being able to offer that up into our communities, now that's a game changer. That's what I'm actually rooting and going for. Starting small, starting in Minnesota. But my prayer is that as we continue to grow, that it will catch on and that other women will have visions and dreams and start new things. And it doesn't all need to revolve around the Kinky Curly Theological Collective. What I'm saying is I'm trying to force a conversation and a change and shift of the conversation so that Black and African American women are actually leading it.
Well, I just pray that the Lord would bless your work. This sounds amazing. It really does sound amazing, and I hope that it does expand and that we see more of these kinds of conversations going on, and that the fruit of these conversations will actually shift what we see as the heart of the church in general. I pray that happens. All right, we're going to go ahead and wrap it up, and you've got a snowstorm to prepare for, so. Sorry. Anyway, but we're going to go ahead and wrap it up. This has been BGWG. And so Ebony and I are saying goodnight for tonight. So in the meantime, we pray that the Lord would bless you and keep you and give you peace.
Amen.
Hey everyone, this is Paul Walker. If you like what you just heard, be sure to check out more of what we have to offer at MennoNerds.com. It's the hub for all things MennoNerds. From there, you can learn more about these podcasts, syndicated blogs from people all over the world, books authored by some of our members, and a host of other exciting free resources for you and your church. Now, there's one last thing. What we do costs a bit of money, and we're always doing it on a volunteer basis. We have people that are committed to making this happen, but we could use more people. If you like what we do, please consider donating monthly. We have two options. You can either do a monthly donation through Patreon, or you can give a one-time donation at any time through PayPal. We love the work we do, but we do need your help to keep it going and to expand into new territory. If you would like to donate, check out MennoNerds.com/donate. Thanks for listening, and as always, have a great day.